Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. Tarpley.net. Tarpley.net is your one-stop shopping to understand all this stuff. The divine plan, again, in the Wall Street Journal last week, indicating the desire of the CIA to take over Afghanistan and run that entire opium mill that's going on there. Get the ground forces out, get the Army and the Marines out. You just work with Predator drones killing people from above and special forces. You make deals with the warlords and the drug lords. That's the divine plan of Jack Devine, not the no other kind of divine plan. So all of this happening, Karzai is fighting back. Karzai is under attack, of course, with these fake transparency and anti-corruption investigations. It's his desire to investigate them, to investigate the investigators. The U.S. hold there is weakening. That's one of the problems. If you take every land-based troop unit out, the place goes back into the Chinese and Iranian orbit or some combination of that. So it's a very difficult position for the imperialists in that corner of the world. We've also got this hysterical Somali terrorist story, Minnesota, Mogadishu axis with Eric Holder coming out with this stunt in the period of less news now in the summer. Speaking of the less news, I think there's some kind of a news embargo on real news this past week. I've never seen such inanity, such frivolity, such triviality in the news reporting, and that's saying something. Now, the thing that has been added to this, the Iranian front, and on the Iranian front, we've got to declare false flag alert. We've got to be ready for just about anything on the Iranian front. The U.S. is now returning to the policy of January, February, March, which is to systematically antagonize China. And we've had two big things in the past week. At a regional meeting of Southeast Asian countries, Hillary Clinton opened her yap and said, well, we have these disputes now over the islands and the sovereignty of the South China Sea, the Spratly Islands and such places. These are claimed by China, by Vietnam, by Taiwan, by the Philippines, by Indonesia. I'm certain to be forgetting some countries. I don't mean to slight their claims, because all of these are plausible and active claims. But the idea now that the U.S. comes in there as the arbiter, well, the Chinese think tank world is up in arms about that, and there is now a backlash developing. And this shows where the whole North Korea DPRK crisis was supposed to go. It's actually now the North Korean gambit as a means of antagonizing the Chinese. And then, if that's not bad enough, to make it even worse, and this is an act, I think, of folly. The Wall Street Journal, Thursday, August 5th, main headline, U.S. and Hanoi in nuclear talks. Yes, indeed. The U.S. and Vietnam, that's the Hanoi government, yes, indeed, discussing nuclear cooperation. And it's going to be one of the sweetheart deals, not the stern kind, right? The kind in the Middle East for the United Arab Emirates. The country involved, which is getting U.S. Nuclear technology, essentially gives up any right of nuclear enrichment on its own for a peaceful nuclear program. It becomes completely dependent on the United States for such enrichment. But in the case of Hanoi, it looks much more like the Indian deal, which is essentially a sweetheart deal that lets you do more or less what you want. So the complete hypocrisy, the complete double standard, Obama's desire for nuclear non-proliferation, even as he supports the U.S. Funneling of nuclear technology towards India, which is a nuclear power, and now Hanoi. Now remember, the thing that the best and the brightest, these imbeciles in the 1960s never figured out, is the long-term hostility of Vietnam against China, which you can get from the writings of Ho Chi Minh and many others. It's obviously an attempt to play Vietnam against China, clear enough. I would tell Vietnam, don't go down that path. You won't fare well. And for China, of course, this is also leading to another round of consternation and dismay, but also then to rage and to the desire to do something about it. So two gratuitous affronts, provocations of China. U.S. meddles in the South China Sea, and U.S. now says this is a complete bilateral thing. The Chinese have nothing to do with it. Imagine the Chinese are shipping nuclear weapons to Mexico. How about that? You can get the idea. And the similar argument is that the Chinese don't like the U.S. fleet presence in the South China Sea. Suppose the Chinese had a couple of aircraft carriers in the Gulf of Mexico. What would be the response? So the double standard here in the fading time of imperialism goes on and on. Now, the Chinese can do something about this. For some reason this week, and I think it's got to do with ginning up a crisis, an AP wire this week tells us about the new Chinese carrier killer missile. This is the Dongfeng 21D, 900-mile range, 1,500 kilometers. And these are designed to destroy large attack carriers, U.S. aircraft carriers. And it's not clear why this becomes a story for the Associated Press, except it's all too clear. It's part of the orchestrated buildup. They do mention a study by retired naval officer James Kraska, Kraska, United States Navy retired. He's written an article in Orbis magazine, Orbis, that in 2015, the Chinese fire several of these Dongfeng 21Ds and sink the USS George Washington. They use a penetrator warhead. The scenario is supposedly the Chinese say 3 of these can sink a carrier. The first one shuts down the flight operations. The second one destroys the engines. The third one breaches the hull, breaks the back of the ship, and sends it to the bottom of the ocean. You may be wondering, when was the last U.S. aircraft carrier to be sunk? As far as I can tell, it is the USS Princeton, destroyed at the Battle of Leyte Gulf in 1944. There were a couple of carriers. I believe the Franklin was one of them that was essentially destroyed at the battles off Okinawa in 1945, but remained afloat and somehow made it home. So the last U.S. carrier to go to the bottom was the Princeton in 1944, and other than that, you've got, I think, 6 of them sunk in 1942, which was the big year of naval battles, right, including Midway, the Coral Sea, and so forth. So that would be from 1944 until X for the sinking of an aircraft carrier. So this is what the Chinese are up to, and the article stresses that the comments in the Chinese story are all very positive. So there it is, and as this builds up, I think you've got some kind of a news embargo, or an order has gone out to the U.S.-controlled Wall Street media to essentially go with the most idiotic news stories that you can. Now, in terms of what to do about this, we got one other issue, which is Assange and WikiLeaks. We've gone through this in the previous broadcast, but the Pentagon is now suddenly, after doing nothing about Assange, the Pentagon, in order to give him another lease on life, to get him on TV again, the Pentagon now says, hey, Assange, you've got 15,000 documents that belong to us which you have not publicized, and we want you to turn them over to us. This is 2 weeks into the story. They suddenly discover this. Now, you have to remember, the U.S. Defense Department, with the hackers and the electronic warfare, the logic bombs that they have, they can destroy anybody's website anytime they want to. And it doesn't matter how many mirror sites or backup servers you have, they will destroy them. So the fact that Assange is getting his stuff posted and remaining up is, I think, a very good sign that the U.S. Defense Department, the U.S. intelligence community wants this done. And the publicity for Assange is overwhelming. We'll be back in a minute.